And abortion is one of the three key issues across the US, and I imagine that is exactly the case where you are.
Oh, absolutely. One of the Democrats I spoke to earlier had a pro-choice T-shirt on, and she told me that a lot of women are going out to vote on this issue, and men too. It was interesting because on the train to Pennsylvania, to Philadelphia just yesterday, I was actually sitting next to the man who had made, I don't know if you saw, that advert for the Democrats that was voiced by Julia Roberts, in which you have, it portrays a woman who is going to the polls wearing a Trump hat, a very bling Trump hat, and then she peeks up whilst she's actually behind the screen to make sure that no one is looking at her vote, and instead of voting for Trump, behind her husband, who is a Trump voter's back, she votes for Harris instead.
Jessica Bazurier in Philadelphia, or thereabouts. Thank you very much indeed for joining us as ever. Always illuminating, Jessica. Thank you for being with us. And I can reassure you that Jessica will have more throughout the evening from that position there in one of the most important swing states, Pennsylvania. Still with us here in the studio, Robert Parsons, our chief foreign editor. Rob, we've spoken about foreign policy issues. We've spoken about Ukraine, the importance of a victory either way for Volodymyr Zelensky, and what happens with the war against Russia. One of the other big burning issues in the world today, of course, is what's happening in the Middle East with the war in Gaza, the war in Lebanon, the possibility of that spreading further, Iran's possible involvement growing, those kind of things. Give us a sense of what either candidate means for that scenario.
Well, you know, I think with Kamala Harris, you'll probably get pretty much the same as we've seen with Joe Biden, although she will come under immense pressure to be tougher on Israel. And I think she's much more likely to get tougher on Israel than Joe Biden because of his past and his long-standing relationship with Israel. You know, Kamala Harris has seemed frustrated, particularly frustrated with Benjamin Netanyahu's government over the last few months. And I think she will use the most recent warning from the US government just 3 weeks ago to the Netanyahu government, unless they did something to drastically improve the amount of humanitarian aid that was getting into Gaza and to make it systematic, that the United States would consider taking measures like reducing the supply of military equipment to Israel. Given the fact that since that warning was made, Israel has taken steps against UNRWA, you know, the United Nations Organizations for Palestinian Refugees, which will seriously, drastically undermine the supply of humanitarian aid even more to Gaza than before. It's possible that if she becomes president that, you know, when she gets the chance to make a difference herself, you know, she wouldn't be inaugurated until January, of course, that she would follow through on those sort of threats to the Israelis, which is why, for sure, Benjamin Netanyahu favors Donald Trump as the next president of the United States. He has a good relationship with Donald Trump. They see eye to eye on a lot of things, have got a similar outlook on the world. You know, when Donald Trump was president the last time, he was very strong in his support of Israel. You know, unlike previous administrations, he decided to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of the Israeli state. He decided to move the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. You know, things that no other U.S. administration had ever contemplated. So he will continue to be very supportive. I mean, he's made that clear, you know, in recent weeks to Netanyahu, when Netanyahu was in the U.S. just not long ago, that, you know, you just get on and do what you need to do, is what he said to Netanyahu. But there's a problem in it, I think, for him, you know, because at the same time, Trump does not want to see the United States dragged into conflict in the Middle East. He's made this clear repeatedly, that he wants to keep the United States out of conflicts which are far away and which are unpopular in the United States. So if Netanyahu decides, for instance, that he will respond to perhaps another attack from Iran in response to the last Israeli attack and attacks Iran again, Israel can only do that with the United States help, with logistical support, which brings the possibility of the United States getting involved in a regional confrontation that much closer. So there is that risk for him at the same time. He'll be faced by a dilemma.
Robert Parsons, as always, thank you very much indeed. Donald Trump's cast his vote in West Palm Beach, Florida, home to his Mar-a-Lago residence. And speaking to reporters afterwards, he criticised electoral voting machines, saying paper ballots were more effective. However, he conceded he would accept the election results if they were, and to quote him, fair. The polls in Florida predict a Republican victory, and it's no longer considered to be a swing state, but still the Democrats were getting out in high numbers. France24, Eliza Herbert with this.
Florida is a Republican stronghold, and yet not everyone is voting for Donald Trump.
I voted for Kamala Harris because she's honest, because Trump is a crook. She's educated, she's intelligent, she has measured words.
But while some Democratic Party supporters expressed hope for the Kamala Harris and Tim Walz ticket, the voting experience was getting on their nerves.
We're in Palm Beach Island, and we're heavily outweighed by the Republican Party here. And I think what's most discouraging for me today is the amount of vitriol and meanness that we've actually seen so far today.
Republicans, on the other hand, expressed confidence and concerns of electoral fraud.
Hopefully we get the results by the end of the day, but I seriously doubt it. They need serious time to try to cheat and try to rig it as much as possible, but I really think this time around it's going to be way too big to rig this time.
We will never give up. We will never concede. It doesn't happen.
The former president has long touted unsubstantiated claims that the 2020 election was rigged, prompting anxiety that violence could erupt if he is defeated once again. But after also casting his ballot in his home state, Trump told reporters he would accept the results.
If I lose an election, if it's a fair election, I'd be the first one to acknowledge it. Of course, there'll be no violence. My supporters are not violent people.
Florida has been trending to the right for several years now, and the Democratic Party has not won a statewide seat since 2018. This presidential election, the state has 30 out of 538 electoral college votes up for grabs.
Eliza Herbert with that report. Let's get more news from on the ground. Washington, D.C. Let's go back there where Francois Picard is waiting for us. Francois joining us live throughout this programme and, of course, throughout the evening, throughout the wee small hours there, bringing us all the developments as they happen from the U.S. Capitol. Francois, great to see you, sir. Tell us, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? What's the feeling where you are?
It depends what echo chamber you inhabit, Mark Owen. And that's one of the big difficulties with this election. It was interesting to listen in that report to Donald Trump saying that we'll never concede. This morning, he said that this race is ours to lose. Same thing on the Democratic side. Earlier, we were speaking with Congressman Glenn Ivey of nearby Maryland, who saw signs that it was positive in their direction. And nowadays, well, when people get their information, they're not looking to find out who's winning sometimes, but who will comfort them in the ideas that they hold. That's the difficulty, and perhaps one of the reasons why there are these fears of violence afterwards is that more and more it will seem unbelievable to your side if the other side wins.
Indeed, Trump's saying what he says about if it's a fair election, there'll be no problems, he'll concede. And his supporters are good people, they're not violent people. That's what he said a little earlier on. Does anybody feel reassured by that?
I mean, right now it's just rhetoric, it's just talk. We'll see what happens when the polls close. In 2020, we thought Donald Trump was going to bed at Mar-a-Lago on the night. Remember that the election took 5 days to be determined one way or the other before Joe Biden won the state of Pennsylvania. Will Donald Trump actually refrain from stating that I won the election election on the night, even if results are not in. It was 2:30 in the morning when he did so last time on the night, and he didn't have results in a lot of places yet. So that'll be, of course, one factor to watch. There have been instances of disinformation that have been cut off at the pass, suspicions of disinformation floated by even foreign players like Russia, says the Michigan Attorney General and the FBI. For now, things going off smoothly in the overwhelming majority of polling stations. Remember, we're in this strange period, this hovering period, Mark Owen. First polls closing in a little under 3 hours' time. It's getting to be afternoon and then evening here in Washington. And we're going to slowly see that tension start to build. For now, though, it's the calm before the storm.
The calm before the storm, and you giving us the context. Francois, great stuff. Thank you very much indeed. Francois Picard joining us live from Washington. Francois with us throughout the evening here on France 24, bringing us developments from the US Capitol. It's the economy that is one of the big issues, of course, and here to talk more about that is Yuka Roya. Great to see you. Americans then casting their ballots. The rest of the world watches, as indeed we are, as the outcome of this election will have global implications, including very much on trade and the economy. Businesses all around the world then, in many ways, holding their breath.
Yeah, indeed, especially for a potential Trump win. Tariffs and trade wars, of course, were a prominent feature of Donald Trump's first presidency, but now he wants to get even tougher on this, promising to impose a blanket duty of 10 to 20% on all imports. A recent survey showed 44% of German companies, for example, fear Trump's return to the White House would negatively impact their business. French firms are equally worried. Trump has doubled down on his position that revenue from those duties could be used to make up for major tax cuts at home, as Brian Quinn takes a closer look.
In his closing campaign arguments, Donald Trump once again returning to his favorite economic policy, tariffs. This time as a strategy to stop the flow of deadly opioids across the Mexican border.
But you sell fentanyl into the United States through Mexico, we're putting a 25% or so tariff on until such time as you stop doing it. And they're not going to do it for long because that is a massive penalty.
It's just one of many problems that Trump, whose previous term featured a tariff-based trade war with both China and the EU, plans to solve via slapping duties on foreign imports. Trump wants to cut traditional taxes on corporate profits from the current 21% rate down to 15% for companies that use American labor. He's also floated proposals to eliminate the federal income tax for police, firefighters, and the military, as well as on tips, overtime pay, and for Social Security benefits, even suggesting that the federal income tax could be replaced altogether by tariffs.
Look, I had a lot of tariffs. I took it. The most beautiful word in the dictionary to me is tariff.
Most economists agree that tariffs almost always result in higher prices for consumers as import costs are passed on, essentially amounting to a significant sales tax. Independent analysis estimates that Trump's policies would amount to an annual tax cut of $7,000 to $36,000 for the richest 5% of Americans, with the rest of the country paying $800 to $1,800 more per year. All while adding as much as $10 trillion over the coming decade to the U.S. national debt.
As we saw in that report, Donald Trump's presidency was marked by trade wars and tariffs. They began in 2018 as his administration slapped tariffs of 25% and 10% on steel and aluminium imports, though some countries later obtained exemptions. With China, the spat escalated, with Washington slapping multiple rounds of punitive duties before the two sides held trade talks. Other protectionist measures included duties on solar panels and washing machines, Mark.
Okay, how about Kamala Harris then? What's her take, her position on trade?
Well, she says she's not a protectionist Democrat, but Kamala Harris is not exactly a free trade Democrat either. While tariffs aren't covered in her official campaign promises, the vice president has spoken in support of using targeted tariffs to address economic and security challenges posed by other nations. She's expected to continue with much of her predecessor Joe Biden's policies on this, including a targeted tax on clean energy-related imports from China and a planned expansion of existing steel and aluminium duties. In fact, President Biden's administration has kept most of the Trump-era tariffs in place. Earlier this year, the government announced tariff hikes on an additional $18 billion worth of Chinese goods, including semiconductors and electric vehicles. A report by the think tank Tax Foundation shows that more revenue from punitive tariffs was collected under the Biden administration than during Trump's first term. The same report also estimates that those trade war tariffs will negatively impact America's GDP as well as others' GDP, of course.
Interesting statistics. Tell us about the markets then.
Well, Wall Street is in a broad rally on election day. Although the race is deemed to be too close to call anytime soon, investors were boosted by the latest data, which showed the US economy was stronger than expected in October. The VIX index, known as Wall Street's fear gauge, is well below levels seen during the 2020 election. Traders are also awaiting the Federal Reserve's latest monetary policy decision due out on Thursday, with an interest rate cut of a 0.25 percentage point expected. On the bond market, the yield on the 10-year US Treasury note spiked around midday, making borrowing costs, of course, higher for the US government, though it has since pulled back. The US dollar, meanwhile, has weakened against other major currencies, dropping about 0.5% against the euro, the British pound, and the Japanese yen.
Hugh Correa with the business, with a particular angle, of course, on the US presidential election. Thank you very much indeed. Great to see you. You come back with more business, of course, in roughly an hour's time. So do stay with us for that, of course, and our continuing coverage of all events relating to the US presidential election. I'll be back with you after a very short break. Before, with a program dedicated to the US presidential election, these are the headlines. Get out and vote, the message from Kamala Harris. The Democrat candidate for the White House is spending the day in Washington. Donald Trump, the Republicans at his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. He says that he'll accept defeat if it's a fair election. Our coverage of a vote that is tighter than a coin flip will continue throughout the evening and into the wee small hours, and most probably beyond. 7 swing states will be the key to the result in this U.S. presidential election. Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. The votes there will be the most scrutinized. We're reporting from across the whole spectrum. Abortion's a major issue in this U.S. election. 10 states have abortion, 4 or against, actually on the ballot as a referendum question, since the Republican-biased Supreme Court overturned a landmark case. This has been a hot-button topic across the U.S., with some American women even crossing into Mexico to have procedures. This is Prime News Paris. Thank you very much for being with us as we speak. The USA is deciding Kamala Harris or Donald Trump for the White House. It's reportedly too close to call, according to the polls from across the United States. Kamala Harris is in Washington, Donald Trump in Florida. Harris urging her supporters to get out and cast those votes. She also said she'll not be distracted by opponents' insults. It has been that kind of campaign. Trump says he will accept defeat if it's a fair election. No evidence of voter fraud this time, nor last time, in spite of his remonstrations in defeat. Both candidates have been talking up their chances, as you'd expect, even as the first result came in as a 50-50 split. That was in Dixville Notch in New Hampshire, a place that traditionally reports the first result in the election. Well, the economy is always a decisive factor, none more so than at the time of an American presidential vote. There's an apparent perception that Donald Trump has a better record on the economy, but the facts from the US Bureau of Economic Analysis show that there's more growth under the Democrat President Joe Biden, and inflation has now fallen to 2.4%. That was in September. But still, Trump trumpets his prowess. Kamala Harris, meanwhile, has played it quite simply, appealing to families by promising to cut the cost of living and reduce the price of their weekly shopping.
Outside of our country. Both Kamala Harris and Donald Trump have pledged to use the government to make goods and housing more affordable, but they have drastically different ideas on just how to do that. As a latecomer to the race, Harris has been rolling out her economic agenda, focused on lifting up the middle class.
We know a strong middle class has always been critical to America's success, and building that middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
Harris is pledging to give money directly to U.S. consumers by permanently expanding the child tax credit, including a $6,000 break for parents with infants, and to give first-time home buyers a leg up by providing a government contribution of $25,000 toward a down payment. Harris also has promised a federal ban on price gouging on everyday items, including groceries. She's proposed paying for all this by raising taxes on the rich, or those making more than $400,000 a year. For his part, Trump has promised to extend his namesake tax cuts, which are due to expire at the end of next year, and to add new tax cuts for corporations and to eliminate taxes on tips.
If you're a restaurant worker, a bartender, a hospitality worker, a caddy, a barber, a mover, driver of any kind, we are going to let you keep 100% of your tip.
Many of the tariffs Trump imposed on China during his first term are still in effect, but if re-elected, he's promised an across-the-board 20% tariff on all imports, costs that economists say would be passed on to consumers.
We will end America's housing shortage by building 3 million new homes and rentals.
While Kamala Harris has pledged to build more housing, Trump says he would free up housing space by deporting millions of immigrants illegally residing in the U.S.
Monty Francis with that report. Selena Sykes joins us here in the studio to show us that sport and politics actually do mix. The US election, touching on all aspects of American life, sport, of course. No exception.
That's right, Mark. Obviously, we see more and more athletes, especially in the US, being more vocal and outspoken in their political and social views. And this is especially, of course, in the age of social media, because they will have these platforms now where they can speak out. We've obviously seen that celebrity endorsements in the US, this isn't the case in Europe, but in the US, have become very big in American politics. And that, of course, includes sports stars who often have bigger social media followings than the US presidential candidates themselves. So what they say reaches a lot of people, and considering how close this election is, both candidates, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, have both picked up on the importance of sport to influence voters.
The Democratic candidate Kamala Harris has quite a lot of basketball stars on her side. Tell us about that.
That's right. Some very high-profile basketball names. Most outspoken athletes, have to be said, tend to be in the NBA. It's seen as more of a progressive sport in the US compared to, say, American football and baseball. And one of the biggest NBA stars, of course, who's come out backing Kamala Harris is LeBron James. He posted on social media a few days ago. He's previously backed Democratic candidates, so this doesn't really come as a surprise, and he's been rather outspoken about Trump in the past. Kamala Harris herself is a big basketball fan. She supports the Golden State Warriors, so perhaps no surprise that their coach, Steve Kerr, was one of the speakers at the Democratic National Convention. He's quite an outspoken liberal himself. He referred to the team who obviously won gold in the Paris Olympics in the basketball, thinking about what these 12 players achieved, having put all their differences and rivalries aside them to represent their country. And one of those players, of course, who also has endorsed Kamala Harris is NBA superstar and Golden State Warrior point guard Steph Curry. We can take a listen to him now.
Together, we can do all things and continue to inspire the world. That's why I believe that Kamala, as president, could bring that unity back and continue to move our country forward. This is about preserving hope and belief in our country. So in the words of Michelle Obama, do something. Go vote. Be active. Let's show out in November like never before. It's been an honor for me to represent our country. It's an honor to support Kamala. So let's all do our part.
So as we can see, Mark, Harris has believed that it's pretty important to get sports stars on her side. She actually set up a group called Athletes for Harris back in September with several big stars signing up to that, including NBA legend Irvin Magic Johnson, tennis star Billie Jean King, and WNBA star Cadence Parker, just some of the names that have signed up to that one.
OK, now, of course, it cuts both ways, doesn't it? The Republicans and Donald Trump also have got some sports endorsements.
That's right. Starting with a star from the biggest sport in the US, which, of course, is American football. The NFL is seen as a more conservative sport. Kansas City Chiefs kicker Harrison Butker is known for his strong ideas, and he recently endorsed Trump because he considers him to be the more pro-life candidate. Another sport that is increasingly popular in the US is the MMA, or the mixed martial arts. Its events are attended by many celebrities, and that includes Donald Trump, who found a very big ally in the UFC president. So that is Dana White, who is in charge of everything that's Ultimate Fighting Championship. And he also spoke in favour of Trump at the Republican National Convention.
President Trump and I have been friends for 25 years. I've said this before, and I'm going to say it again. He is the most resilient, hardest working human being that I've ever met in my life. I know he's a great leader. This is not my opinion, not my hope. He's proving.
And so, obviously, in the grand scheme of things, Mark, these endorsements probably don't make a massive difference. They won't be decisive alone in deciding these elections, of course, but in terms of marginal gains, they could be important, especially with undecided voters who might be sports fans. Both campaigns have also run ads before games. Trump, who has obviously been courting young men who are undecided, he's been running ads attacking Harris's stance on transgender issues during broadcasts of American football games. Harris, too, has had ads out before NFL games. This could be a way to see her to increase her reach with men, because obviously we know that gender gap is a big issue in this election, with Trump polling better with men and Harris better with women. But all of these tactics could also backfire, because obviously a lot of people, when they watch sport, they just want to watch sport and see it as a bit of escapism. So potentially some resenting the fact that politics is encroaching on their sport.
Selena, thank you very much indeed for that breakdown of who backs who and why, most importantly, and whether it makes any difference. Of course, we'll have to wait and see how the polls turn out. Selena with all the sport. Back, of course, very shortly with another update on what the US is thinking politically and sportingly. Great to see you. Thank you very much indeed. We take a very short break, and then we'll be focusing on what this US election means for Africa. A special Eye on Africa program about that. Stay with us.
Breakthrough is the answer to the prayers of millions and millions of people.
Together, because we love our country, we're here to fight for our democracy.
And we will make America great again.
When we fight, we win.
Which direction will America take? Find out on November 5th, only on France 24.
Hello and welcome to Eye on Africa. I'm Clarisse Fortuné, and these are the headlines. All eyes are on the US elections, including in Africa. The results might have an impact on the continent, including on those benefiting from financial assistance or those hoping to go live the American dream. Kigali denies any military involvement in Mozambique after the main opposition leader accused Rwanda of playing a part in a crackdown on post-electoral protests.